Well, I'm being told I can't rotate my phone, so a little out of it this morning, understandably. May not be on top of my tech game. Okay, let me see if I can prop this up here in my kitchen. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Tara Thomas. Amanda Goodman is off today, as we like to say in the TV news lingo. She is not feeling well, so I wish her the best. I hope she gets well soon. It's been a busy week and a stressful week for many people. So understandably, she's also facing the fall sinus allergy issues that a lot of people are dealing with. And I knew she was not feeling well because yesterday she got a medicine ball from Starbucks. That is the drink that she inevitably will grab if she's starting to feel sick. So little plug for Starbucks, even though they're not an official sponsor at this point. I should mention that. We're so happy on Fridays that she and I both or individually can take time to just connect with all of you. And it's been a little bit of a daunting weekly assignment, but then once we go live and we share sort of all the things going on in our midst, we always say how much we enjoy it, because that's the one thing we really miss from TV, was that ability to connect with people through a screen. And thanks to the way technology has advanced, I can do that, right? Just with a phone and a microphone, literally sitting in my kitchen. And as you can tell with the tired eyes and the sleep shirt, I've yet to fully emerge from my slumber on this Friday morning. So a couple of things to highlight that we took part in this week that were so fun. We had another Faith in 4-Letter Word show, this time in Farley. It was Wednesday night at the Milestone Event Center. And I'm telling you, it was such a great space. Small town fun fact or small world connection. One of my kids' former Montessori preschool teachers is now the co-owner with her husband and her siblings of the Milestone Event Center in Farley, Melissa Jo Demmer. And I say Melissa Jo because she puts that on Facebook, and my middle name is Tara Jo. So I like saying Melissa Jo. So it was so fun because we got to reconnect, and I only knew her as Miss Melissa, which is what the kids called her. And she and her family have been longtime Farley business owners, a trucking company, and now this event center. So we just appreciate the welcoming spirit of another wonderful venue. 380 women and one brave man came to the show, which was so great. And afterward, we talked to the gentleman, and he didn't know what to expect. He was riveted and fascinated and loved it, and now is possibly planning to come to our October 12th show at the Diamond Joe Casino in the Mississippi Moon Bar, this great space they have at the Diamond Joe, where years ago my husband and I actually saw Ted Nugent perform. It's an incredible venue. So we would love, if you're in the Dubuque area, to see you on October 12th on that Saturday. We've been sharing the ticket link on our Faith in 4-Letter Words page, or you can just go to the Diamond Joe website, and under their entertainment section, they have a link to the tickets that they're selling for us. So what a cool venue. We can't wait for that and so many upcoming shows. And then I have to mention, on last night, Thursday, we had another opportunity to do what we're calling our corporate gigs. So think of professional development on the job. VGM, a very successful, far-reaching company that's based in Waterloo, that's actually not too far down the road from me, they were so kind to extend an opportunity for us to do really an intimate night with all of their staff, specifically female employees. They also opened it up to men. One man, Ben, was brave enough to come. His wife had seen a couple of our shows, and she said, you have to go. Really fun connection. Ariane Martinez, who is our merchandise queen with Ivory Flamingo, she also works, that's her day job, at VGM. So we just had the best time. Jeremy Stoles, the CEO, was there. And I have to give a shout out to Mike Malero, the former CEO, who has been in our corner and such a supportive person from the beginning of our journey. He's an ever-present like on LinkedIn whenever we share our show details. And he was the one who said, I'd love to bring your message to the women of VGM. It's an employee-owned company. And here's the cool twist. Now the staff has grown to about 2/3 women, is what I'm told. So it was a perfect audience to bring our Faith in 4-Letter Words message to, because not only are they dealing with all of the same challenges that many of you face in your professional life, but now with 2/3 of women, that can bring its own set of challenges, because as Amanda and I detail, a lot of times in the corporate world, it's, dog eat dog. And for women, it can be very competitive and catty. And so it was just a good reminder of how you want to maximize those females in your midst and forge those bonds with them, as Amanda and I did, even though when she initially came to replace me at the station, some of the male influencers would probably want to see more of an adversarial relationship between some of the women than one of allyship. And so that's sort of the trend that we bucked, and that is what truly was at the heart of why we launched Faith in Four-Letter Words. For those of you who, like me, will never forget December 11th, or September 11th rather, this was another impactful anniversary of that tragic day in our country's history. It was actually really somewhat cathartic, because it's now been turned into a day of service. And so the city of Waterloo partnered with a lot of local organizations, and we did this incredible community outreach where thousands of volunteers fanned out and did various projects to give back, including all the Waterloo School sixth graders. So we had a wonderful opportunity out at Memorial Stadium to be part of an honoring parade for the veterans, emergency service providers, and all the police and fire that came, as well as the military service members, including those junior ROTC students from East and West high schools. And that was really neat to see, because the sixth graders, young, not even born, of course, when 9/11 happened, they were very respectful. So I so appreciated being a part of that. For me personally, 9/11 was so life-changing. I was a news anchor at the time out in Yakima, Washington. So when I first heard about the Pentagon being hit, I was on a high school track near where I lived, and I had, to date myself, I had Sony Walkman headphones on. We were still using, crazy to think, in 2001, we were still using those kind of padded headphone covers with attached to what we called a Walkman, where we would actually listen to, in my case, AM radio. I would listen to AM radio when I was out jogging on the track to sort of catch up on the news. And it was local news personalities who would share details about what was happening in our community, which of course I was interested in as a news anchor. And I'll never forget when they sort of broke in with their top of the hour coverage, the Associated Press, and they said something, to the effect of the Pentagon being hit. And once you heard that it wasn't just an errant tourist plane accident hitting the first tower, it was then connected beyond to the Pentagon and, of course, Pennsylvania with Flight 93. It was just so surreal. And I remember a couple women that were on the track. When we passed, I kind of exchanged glances with them, and we both sort of referenced or acknowledged, like, what? Are you hearing this? What's going on? And our world was never the same. Shortly after 9/11, within a month, I was supposed to fly to Salt Lake City to meet my parents. My mom was an elementary school principal in Peoria, and a family had a cabin near Jackson Hole, Wyoming, that they were letting us go and stay in for a weekend getaway. When I came out of the plane in Salt Lake to the main hub of the airport, I'll never forget the image of all the National Guardsmen with assault rifles who were positioned all across the airport. In some respects, I've never felt safer with that level of security, but I also just distinctly remember that moment where you look and you feel like, okay, now I know what it feels like in Israel, or these communities or countries where high level security is not a rarity. It's a daily reality of their life with the threats to their security. And it changed so many of us. For those of you who were like me working at the time, it really completely changed our perspective on the safety at work. And this was, a precursor, of course, to school shootings. So I enjoy, and I'm fascinated with all of the documentaries about 9/11. Each year, I feel that more surfaces that's so intriguing, interesting. My parents had the opportunity to visit the 9/11 Ground Zero Memorial Museum in New York. They've highly recommended others do so. So I hope to get my family there at some point, because I want my children to understand that freedom isn't free and all the things, right, about never forget the lessons we learned from our history and past. And of course, how that was a direct attack on our soil, much like Pearl Harbor was for those of the older generation. For me, going now down this rabbit hole of 9/11 remembrance is so easy thanks to a little thing called our iPhone or a cell phone, the internet, TikTok, social media apps. I found so many interesting clips on TikTok. As much as I know TikTok can be a lot of garbage, it can just really be educational and informational to get all those snippets of video and clips that you may never know existed. So I was so struck this week listening to this gentleman who worked at the South Tower on a high floor when the first plane hit the North Tower. And to hear him recount how that played out, they heard the crash, this boom that would have sounded like nothing they've ever heard before when that large plane was crashing into the adjacent tower. And he said they were in the middle of a trading room. He was a markets trader. He went straight with his coworkers over to the windows because, of course, this is the World Trade Center tower. So, I mean, everything is glassed in. And they're watching in horror this gaping hole in the side of the tower. And they have this up close, horrific view of all of the papers that were flying out of the floors that had been hit. But more shockingly, the people who were still alive that they could see in the windows. And then tragically, some of them who jumped right in front of their eyes. Now, this was the part that blew my mind. He said, as they were watching this incredibly horrific scene, there was still this announcement going over the PA system at work, like, okay, let's go back to our seats. We're going to continue working. I mean, that's how our culture has changed, because I'll tell you what, in 2024, something like that happens. I mean, as we know, we hear a car backfire in a school or at work. We immediately think that there is an active shooter or there is an unsafe situation. But in 2001, it was so rare that those kinds of attacks would happen when you were doing your normal daily activities at work, at school. No one would fathom that anything like that would happen. So when that plane hit that other tower, they were truly in the mindset like, oh, we're just going to keep working in the tower right next to, the one where people are literally jumping off of the 84th floor. I mean, it just blew my mind, because in today's world, where maybe it's a plus that we're a lot more vigilant and we're a lot more, I guess, in some ways, not just reactive, but proactive, because that South Tower ultimately was hit and fell as well. Of course, they should have evacuated all those people out of the South Tower. But at the time, they just thought, okay, they're going to clean up the scene in the tower next to us, and we're going to continue our workday. And he said in this TikTok, it blew my mind, that not only did people stay in the trading room floor where they were, but they were discouraged from leaving. And he got a call from a friend. He was Canadian and had moved to New York. He got a call from a Canadian friend who said, get out now, because they were seeing the news coverage and the exterior shots of the building that he was hyper focused on, through the window, to say, this is not good. You need to get out. You need to get away from those towers. So he and another coworker decided they were going to go down the stairs. Of course, the elevators shut down at that point for security. But here's the thing. Each floor had secured doors to keep you from getting into the adjacent floors. So when he was being turned away at the stairwells, he did have to ultimately go back up toward his office. And when he went back up, the second plane hit. He had just missed being on his floor where one of the wings of the second plane sliced through the entire floor of where he had just been sitting. Him leaving that call from his friend in Canada saved his life. He ended up being the last person alive to get out of the South Tower. And this was the part that, as a person of deep faith, really struck me. He said he will never forget that he and all these people that were essentially trapped on those high floors started being overcome by smoke. And he and these people had to drop down and were literally lying on their stomachs, trying to catch any oxygen they could, because the billowing smoke was starting to overcome and overtake the entire upper floors. And he said that as he was lying down, they started to get sleepy, almost that feeling of, okay, my organs and my lungs are starting to be affected, so I'm just going to rest. And can you imagine in that moment, I mean, falling asleep, that almost brought me a little bit of peace, thinking that some of those people then who perished when that tower fell, maybe they were unconscious, right? Or they were sleeping, if you will, from all this smoke. So here was the part that just blew my mind. He said he heard a voice telling him to get up and go. And he said, as a person of faith, he believes it was God. And he said, if I heard that voice today, I would not hesitate to follow the directions. And the voice told him to go. And when he got up, he said he was able to make one last ditch effort push against a wall. Well, the wall collapsed, and beneath it opened a stairwell that gave him access to be able to exit the building from, again, I believe he was on like the 84th floor. He was able to go all the way down, ultimately get out, and his life was spared. And those stories are tenfold of the people who survived. And I've never not been riveted and fascinated right by those, because it changed all of our lives. I mean, it was truly the most tragic thing that in my lifetime I had experienced as an American. And I was talking to Amanda this week about the way journalism was back then. I mean, you were not supposed to share any personal opinions. In fact, we weren't even supposed to talk about being patriotic. Wearing like a flag pin on your lapel was a no-no in journalism, because you're just supposed to be stoic and neutral and not have an opinion. How times have changed, right? Because now everybody has an opinion. Many of the on-air personalities share them publicly on social media. We just didn't do that. It was a different time. We wanted to be removed and professional and maintain sort of a neutral position, whatever may come in terms of story coverage. That day was different. That week was different. When I went out as a news anchor and covered on location a vigil that was happening where I lived in Yakima, Washington, and everyone was holding hands and they were singing songs and people were praying, I joined in. I grabbed hands with my fellow Americans and I joined in the remembrance and honoring and being a physical part of what I was covering as a news anchor. And I remember I told Amanda, I said in my live shot when I was talking back to the studio anchors, I said, you know, yes, I am a reporter and I'm out here covering this story, but I'm an American first, and I cannot separate my pride and my reverence for our country and our freedom in this moment. And later that week when I was out, I had a viewer come up to me and he just said, I really appreciate you doing that, because that was so rare that we were allowed to really share how we truly feel and or truly felt. So he and so many others, that was sort of the beginning of realizing like we're human too. And all those news people, of course, all the emergency responders that were down at ground zero, those that have the stories to tell, I will never get tired of listening to them, because it's an important part of our history and something that we should record, reflect on, and year after year go back to, revisit, to remind ourselves that all of the peace that we took for granted for years and still do comes at a price, comes at a cost. And I'll just never get past how that changed our country and our world. And I'm grateful for those teachers who keep imparting those lessons to the young people, because it's something that for me, I would definitely want my children and future generations to not just be aware of, but to sort of embed in their minds as a great example of how all of the freedoms of a democracy that we get to enjoy, that we're afforded, not only should they not be taken for granted, but please exercise your right to be part of this experiment called the United States of America that is a beacon on the hill, if you will, and voting and taking part in all of our democratic elements is something that I hold very sacred. My daughter, who just turned 18, was excited that she's now able to register to vote. So I appreciated that she seemed to put that high on her priority list as a young person, because a lot of us maybe don't see that same kind of fervor with younger generations. I also have to mention, and Amanda and I, unfortunately, I wish she were here to talk about this with me, the debates, right? Because we both are so committed to maintaining our sort of independent journalistic approach to politics. So neither one of us is registered as a Democrat or Republican. We're both independents. And that's continued past our days on TV because we just never felt that how we personally voted or what we think is right or wrong, that's not our place to sort of dictate that to others. I mean, George Clooney is not the person who tells me who to vote for, nor should there be any other, in my opinion, Hollywood personality who feels that just because they're famous and have a platform, then they're an expert on, issues facing average Americans. I just don't see that correlation. And so she and I were talking about something that was so disheartening. She did a post following the debate on her professional Amanda Goodman page where she alluded to the fact that it was so sad on the eve of 9/11 that our country appears to be so divided when that was the one time that I remember everybody came together no matter their political persuasion. I mean, when George Bush and Tony Blair were in the, chamber, and then Bush was down at Ground Zero with then Mayor Rudy Giuliani. I mean, you talk about inspiring words and a feeling of just collective patriotic fervor. I mean, we came together. That was the only silver lining of 9/11. When George Bush was telling everybody, with real tears, how much we as Americans had to stay strong and soldier on and rebuild and all the things. I mean, it would send chills down anybody's spine to feel how much emboldened and impassioned just commitment to caring and to coming together as a country was behind that. And she and I were both lamenting the fact that it's too bad Rudy Giuliani sort of fell out of favor in his later years because his speech that he gave at Ground Zero, it is the words and the way that it was delivered were so meaningful. When I was getting my master's at the University of Iowa in strategic communication, they cited Rudy Giuliani's Ground Zero speech as a lesson for all of us in how to handle crisis communication. So, I mean, it is in textbooks. It's being upheld as a model for incredible words of really wisdom at a time when many people needed to hear it. I mean, that's the power of words, right? So when we think about that time in our lives in 2001, in contrast to where we are politically today, she was simply making the point that it was so different years ago in so many ways, especially before social media dominated our lives and polarized us because, your algorithm is serving up all the things that you already believe and it's just reinforcing your opinion. And we've lost a lot of our ability to be open-minded because we're addicted to phones that are conditioning us to feel a certain way. So she posts this. So people were fighting in the comments, attacking her for even suggesting that, we're polarized when in no way, shape, or form was she taking a position or siding with a candidate. And she ultimately just took the post down because she said this was just so disheartening to read. And then it reminded us of something that we always talk about. And it's simply this. We've said this before on our Faith and Four Letter Words podcast. The person in the White House does not dictate my mood, my level of contentment, or my family's well-being. Yes, a politician, a body of politicians, elected officials, yes, they influence policies and rules and regulations. But in my day-to-day life and in our home, we're answering to a higher power and we're coming together as a family unit to go through all the ups and downs that, day-to-day life brings. And it does not make me happy or sad to feel that somebody in the White House, whether I agree with them or not, is going to impact my family so personally and so positively or negatively that it will dictate and determine if the next 4 years of my life are happy and productive. That's just not how it works. All the times in my life when I've had horrible things happen or wonderful blessings befall me, I don't ever go back and say, you know what? And that's because so-and-so was in the White House. That's why that was such a great celebratory time in my life because you know who was president. I mean, it's so weird how we like connect so much of this personal happiness to politics. And that's just not the way that, if you really take a hard look at your day-to-day life, that's just not how it works. So let's back off the keyboard and let's remember that years ago, you had no idea how your friends or neighbors were voting, or in many respects, you had no idea how they felt politically, because sometimes political conversation was taboo when you were in person socially. And now we can all hide behind our keyboard and scroll and find out, who thinks what, so we can block them or defriend them or think differently about them. And I refuse to do that. If my social media is not filled with opinions all over the map, then I've got a problem, because I'm really living in a bubble and isolating myself from the beauty of free speech, where we can all have our own varied opinions. And I definitely learn from that patchwork of all over the map expressions, memes, any and all things being shared as posts. I learn from people that think differently from me. And that's partly why I probably became a journalist, because I have that innate curiosity. And I just don't want anybody to feel that they're right and you're right and somebody else is wrong, so much so that it impacts how you treat them or how you engage with them socially. I think that that's a huge no in the way that our country has evolved. And so she and I are very vocal about encouraging people to don't use your voice, but then don't try to silence someone else's, right? Because that's not how it works. You don't get to say how you feel and blast everybody on Facebook and then get mad because someone challenges you and decide to delete their comment or block them, right? That's what doesn't seem to be sort of fair play in this world of politics. And the other thing I have to mention, it's a hyper-local situation. For those of you that don't live in our community locally, you may not be aware that there was a tragic accident this week where some high school students were involved in a crash. There was a woman in an SUV, and when the car that the students were in collided, it caused just horrible grief to result from the death of one of those students, as well as serious injuries from some of the others involved in the crash. And the school district where these students attend is Union Community School District. The main city in that district is LaPorte City, but some of the surrounding communities have students who go there, like Buckingham is one of the towns. And I believe one of the students was from another small town called Traer. Amanda has a lot of personal connections because she knows many families in LaPorte City, and her daughter was friends with and is friends with some of these students involved in the crash. So it really hit her hard this week, because it's been bothering us to think about this child who died was a senior in high school. And so now all of the things that are going to come to pass during the school year, the last football game, the parent night for the senior players, the senior Sundays, all of the events that happen leading up to graduation, the senior pictures and getting the cap and gown, and just all of the rites of passage that many of us enjoy seeing our children go through that we take for granted. It's bothering us tremendously to think about those parents and those families now being denied that opportunity for their child, or having to think about it now so differently because one of the chairs will be empty. And then one of their children might have life-changing injuries that they never recover from. And so, as we know, and we always say it, life can and will change in an instant. And so many of you have gone through your own personal tragedies and challenges. And we just remind everybody that life is so precious, and we put all of our, heartfelt thoughts and prayers, as cliche as that might sound, behind the community of Union School District. And we wish that others could be the long-term support and network of caring that these families need, because once the news moves on and we go to the next week's headline or the next tragedy, unfortunately, that will come, we forget that for those families, this is just the beginning. You know, when everybody goes home from the funeral, in the case of when my father died, that's when my mom was truly coping, but because that was the first time that she really had to accept, okay, now I'm living alone in this house because my partner, my husband, my high school sweetheart that I was married to for decades is never coming back. And so for those families to know that in the case of one child, he's never coming back is absolutely heart-wrenching. And so we just wanted to talk about that. And we wanted all these families to know that you're top of mind and that we are all thinking about you. And I do think that there is a benefit to social media in that there were hundreds of comments on some of the local media coverage about the accident. So I hope in due time, those families can take some comfort in knowing that people care and that we all, as jaded and cynical as we can be about life, we all are just heartbroken and we lift you up in prayer. And I'm going to really go out on a limb here, something that I would never be able to do if I were a TV news anchor in a traditional media outlet. But because this is Amanda and my private Facebook page, and because faith in four-letter words is our mantra, I'm going to just ask everybody to join me in prayer, because I'm a very vocal praying person and somebody who appreciates that my children are asked on a regular basis to pray over meals and to pray as a family, because I want prayer to be a part of their daily life and rhythm going into adulthood, whether they choose to exercise it or not. It's a practice that we've modeled in our home. And so I'm going to just bow my head and close my eyes and say, Dear Heavenly Father, I just ask that you bring peace to all of the families, the children that were involved in that horrible accident this week at the Union School District community. We are heartbroken at the loss of life, the injuries that are sustained, the lives that will forever be changed. And we just ask you to wrap your loving arms around all of the people impacted, to lift up the community, the children, to pour out the love and support that we know these families and everyone involved are going to need moving forward. And we just remind everyone that you are a good God, you are a gracious God, and we know that you have an ability, as the Bible promises, to bring us the peace that passes understanding that nobody else can put on our hearts. And just bring that to these children and families. Cover them with the love and care from the Father that only you can bring. And we ask this in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. So thank you if you stayed on the feed and allowed me to pray, because it's important to me that I recognize that life, as we said, is fleeting, and I'm grounded in my faith, and God has helped me through so many challenging situations in my life that I would be really missing a unique opportunity to not continue to express and share how my faith is my foundation, and it's something that I lean into that far surpasses any human condolence or anything that, I can read on Facebook to try to feel better. So don't be ashamed about sharing your faith and being open about your faith. I find that sometimes when we do our shows, I've even had people come up to me and ask me if I would pray with them, and I can't think of any higher honor. And recently I had a former coworker reach out to me on Facebook. She is going through a horrible situation where she has a granddaughter and the granddaughter's husband. So the gentleman that married her granddaughter has a horrible health, tragic situation going on, one that's going to take, a huge amount of recovery and probably money if he's unable to work. And so she had just reached out to me, and she said something that in writing to me that was one of the most impactful things that anyone has ever said to me. And she said, would you please pray for my grandson-in-law, the father of her, or the husband rather, of her granddaughter. She said, because I feel like God listens to you. And that stopped me in my tracks reading that, because I thought, you know what? God listens to all of us. No one is removed from him. We all are able to have direct access to God. And it's surreal because it's hard to imagine that in human terms. So I wanted to just, tell everybody who can hear the sound of my voice, you don't have to go through a pastor or a priest or whoever you feel, has some religious authority. Like, Jesus died on the cross for us so we can go straight to the Father. We have a direct line. You don't have to go through the hierarchy to reach him. You can connect with him at any time, anywhere, pray without ceasing. When I'm driving in my car and I'm listening a lot of the time to Life 101.9. Side note, I'm listening to Life 101.9 right now because I drive Charlotte's Honda Civic and I don't have the ability to plug my phone in and stream Spotify like I do in my more modern car. So I do fall back on contemporary Christian and music, and Life 101.9 is a local radio station that I've listened to for over 20 years. And so I've leaned into it a lot these last few weeks just for various reasons. And what I love about being in my car, as much as we sometimes hate the commute or the drive that we have to do, running to and fro, doing errands, it's a great time to worship and just connect with God. And so in the car, I will be thinking about something and it never fails. Right then, a song or a lyric will hit me and I'll think, thank you, God. Thank you for that reminder. Because in that moment, when you're facing those dark days or that valley in your life, as we like to say, sometimes he's the only one that can give you some hope, and you can always turn to him. And for me, that's literally turning on the dial when I'm in the car or when I'm at work and pulling out my YouVersion Bible app where I do a daily devotional. And you just make it a rhythm of your life, just like you brush your teeth, you do all the things. Get into a rhythm of prayer and connecting with God, and you watch how that changes your life. I promise you, it will bring you a peace that you've never experienced, and it does impact the way you involve your coworkers in conversation, the way that you treat your spouse, the way that you engage with your children. We're always growing. We're always trying to be better. I learn from others and I improve from modeling their lives. And I know that you're doing the same. And so that's why connection is key. That's why I love the world of social media, because I can connect with a lot of people I don't get the pleasure of speaking with in person. And then, of course, by an unexpected blessing through our Faith in 4-Letter Word show, we've been able to connect with thousands of women, primarily in person, that we never had the privilege of meeting before. And we love meeting people who also are just trying to live their life, faithfully and respectfully and be a good person. And what a blessing that we have so many people like that across Eastern Iowa and beyond. And Amanda and I are happy to live here and be part of these communities, and then have the pleasure, the joy of going into the communities and talking to these women directly that, as we like to say, are sometimes overlooked. The widows, the women that are empty nesters who feel like maybe they don't have a purpose anymore because, their children are long gone and everyone's moved on and they've sort of been cast aside. And what I'll tell you is you do have a purpose. My mom, as a 79-year-old widow, has so much yet to pour into me, my sister, and our children, our families, as do you, as do so many of you. So we honor you and we uplift you on this Friday, and we remind you that if you're not dead, God's not done. The line I stole from my pastor, Pastor Q at Hope City Church. We have so many blessings to bestow on others, and we have so many gifts and talents that we can continue to use for good. And so go out there this Friday and do that act of kindness. Give those comforting words to that friend or coworker, or reach out to that person that's God has put on your heart that needs to be given some uplifting positivity. Those are the small but very meaningful things we can do to make the world a better place. As cheesy as it sounds, I believe in that hope and optimism. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Amanda, get well soon. And we will be back a week from now, 7 a.m. every Friday, for the morning show. News you can use. For some of you, it's also just to see how bad I look without makeup, and that's fine. I hope you have a great day, and we love all of you, and we just appreciate everybody coming alongside us in this journey we call life. Take care.